So the first question is focused on you. Since becoming moderator of the United Church, what have you discovered about the United Church that has surprised you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question and it's still hard to answer. There are lots of things that haven't surprised me, which is that we haven't quite got our feet under us in terms of a new normal in this phase of COVID-19, and also in terms of the restructuring of the church and the loss of presbyteries. I think you'll hear it at your regional meeting, but I shared that Michael Schuberg, who's the executive director at Five Oaks Center in Paris, just outside of Brampton, said to me in a planning retreat in February, it's like the church restructured and then the universe restructured. And so what's not surprising to me is that people are still trying to figure out what life in our communities of faith is really like in that context that is I think we expected some disruption and change management from restructuring the church, but I think that when we're faced with the challenge of change, we rely on our existing beliefs, and we didn't know, so I guess what surprised me is when the feedback to the church during the comprehensive review process was so strongly that people didn't feel well served by, or that they had the energy anymore to serve presbyteries. We restructured the church, and there are all kinds of mechanisms in the new structure of the church to allow for these sort of like sub-regional ways to engage together. But then right away we're hit with a pandemic, and it causes us to want to go back to what we know. And so what's been surprising to me is the number of people who say they miss presbytery. And I 100% get why. Because it's what we knew, and in the midst of having to pivot a million times and keep up to date on both personally and in terms of the church on what current health orders were, and caring for our loved ones and feeling scared and all of those things, imagining what are the ways that new life can blossom up within our regions, and create bridges between the regions and our communities of faith. Nobody had time for that. And so yeah, I guess that's the thing that's been the biggest surprise. Another big surprise was the fact that nobody let their name stand. I think, knowing the crew of people here that discerned and approached me about asking to let my name stand for moderator, I think that in hindsight, they were pretty strategic to try and do it in November and to get my name out first. So, and I had... I had mixed feelings about nobody else letting their name stand. It sort of caused a repeat of the church governance kerfuffle that happened when Stan Mackay was nominated for moderator, because again, then he was going into general council, the only nominee for moderator. And then Bill Stedman, we don't have a process for acclamation, right? So we still have to have an election if there's only one candidate. And so your vote is really between the nominee and the current moderator, because as I realized, former moderator Richard had a lot of anxiety about, don't withdraw, or what happens if the court says no. And then during my installation pledge I had to take was that I would serve as moderator until such time as a successor is chosen. So really, the church could have voted, no, we don't want Carmen, which would have been then saying to Richard, actually, we still want you. And he had already accepted a call for December, so that he was anxious about that. But so because of that, and because of, I think it's loosened a little bit now, but in the early 90s when Stan was elected, there was this we have to choose between at least two people. There has to be sort of a first past the post minimum election. And so Bill Stedman got nominated from the floor of General Council in Fredericton, and it ended up being causing some cultural tension between Stan and Bill. And because in Indigenous communities, a lot of Indigenous communities can do things from a much more consensus-based decision-making process. And so Stan's perspective at the time was that the church had come to consensus around now was the time to have an Indigenous candidate for moderator. So it was a little bit weird to be in this situation 30 years later, where the same conversations were happening about, do we have to nominate somebody else so that Carmen could get elected? And it was all very uncomfortable to sort of be the only one, and to have those conversations where it's not personal, but also from a governance perspective, can we do it this way? And that was weird at the same time as I felt very supported and called to this ministry by the wider church. The last thing I will say is, given how much disruption there has been in the last 3 or 4 years in the church, the number of communities that are not just surviving COVID and surviving the restructuring of the church, but finding new ways to engage in ministry and sort of letting go of ideas of the old, and finding that when they do that, that they're thriving. And so I recently had the opportunity to worship with Orchard Valley United Church in New Minas, Nova Scotia. And I can see why the regional minister, I had 2 invitations to preach the Sunday that I was there, one from Halifax, Dartmouth area and one from New Minas. And Faith was like, you have to go to New Minas, which also happens to be where my grandparents used to worship before they passed away. They just did a $2 million renovation to their church building. They're growing, and part of that comes out of the amalgamation of churches in Kentville and Wolfville, which are now a library and a brewery. But the amount of enthusiasm and joy that was present, they're currently worshiping out of the old Sears at the mall in New Minas while they're renovating their church, and they have yoga in the space, and they have this foot care ministry where they have registered nurses that do foot care by donation for seniors. There's a really high number of seniors that live in the community that don't necessarily have access to foot care through the medical system in Nova Scotia. And so they have a separate storefront in the same mall that will stay there, that is that allows people to get their feet looked after. And just, the same as we did foot care at First United in the downtown east side. And it's not only about checking on people's feet, but also a point of social connection and checking in and knowing who's around and well in the community, and then noticing when people are not around and well, and being able to do sort of a wellness check with people that you know and love. And so that's one example. I'm attending this coming weekend in Victoria, the Resurrect Party for Pacific Mountain region, and which the whole weekend is about celebrating where we see signs of resurrection in the church. So the amount of joy that I see despite all of the challenges also, I don't know why. Maybe I just want to be like C.S. Lewis and be surprised by joy.
I think joy is always great, and I always think it's a great day if I have a moment to laugh and laugh hard. So I appreciate that reference to joy. I think you